Hello, hello, good morning, good afternoon. We're so glad you all are joining us today for what we hope will be a really helpful conversation about some key metrics. I'm going to let a few more people join the room here, but as they do, we'll introduce ourselves. My name is Caitlin Green. I use she, her pronouns. I'm a senior consultant here at TRG Arts. And I am calling in from a very warm, not remotely fall-like Pittsburgh today. And I'm joined by my wonderful colleague, Katie. Katie, please say hi to everyone.
Hi, folks. I'm Katie Hey. I use she, her pronouns. I'm the consulting analyst here at TRG Arts, and I am zooming in away from Minneapolis. We're kind of cloudy. I feel like this is more on par with fall, but still not quite got down to those crisp temperatures yet.
Yeah, Katie, we were talking about this before we started, and this is probably the most important thing you'll learn in this whole session, but are you a pumpkin spice latte person or no?
I like some of the seasonal stuff. I like the pumpkin cookies you can get, but I'm not into the Starbucks pumpkin spice thing. A little too sweet and funny to me. How about you?
No, it's not totally my thing, but it seems to be everyone else's thing because I went to the grocery store and it's everywhere. So folks, if you've got a favorite PSL product, you can drop it in the chat. Please say hi to your colleagues here. We'll be using all of the great things Zoom has to offer today. So as you've got comments, questions, as we're going through today's presentation, you can use the chat. You can use the Q&A feature, and we will answer as many of those as we can in the session. If anything is left unanswered, we will get back to you shortly thereafter. Pumpkin spice is the best in pumpkin pie. Matt, yes, there I can totally agree. I will take it in my pumpkin pie anytime. All right, folks, you're here. We're going to get started. I think we'll be here about 45 minutes or so. We have intentionally left time at the ends of this to address your questions, so keep those coming in as you have them. And let's get started. We are here today to talk about key metrics, 5 of them, in fact, that you need to consider in your single ticket sales campaigns. Now, ever so quickly, I think most of you know who we are, but in case you don't, or if this is your first time tuning in to a TRG something, welcome. This is who we are. We are people who love to teach and learn. We work exclusively in the arts and culture field as consultants, as data analysts, bringing people together around data to make really great strategic decisions for their organizations and tactically stay really aligned with where they want to go. So we do things like this in big groups. We do a lot of one-on-ones, but we are here to serve the field and really happy to have you joining us. Now, a quick note, because we've got people from coast to coast here in North America and friends from all over the UK joining us today. So let's talk about vocabulary. We will use some words interchangeably. Many of them appear on your screen now. Single ticket buyers, ticket bookers. What we're talking about here are folks who are buying tickets for one event at a time outside of any kind of subscription or membership series that you may offer. So you may also have subscribers that buy additional single tickets. Yes, this can sort of be included there, but really we're talking to people who we don't have currently engaged in a loyalty program. So that's what we're talking about. We'll say bookers, we'll say ticket buyers, all the same thing today. Now, our goal in this session is to really give you focus. So whether you are swimming in more data than you know what to do with, or if you're just now starting to bring data into your regular practice around campaign assessment and understanding your audiences, this conversation will give you a place to refocus if you're in that swimming data mode, or start your conversations internally about how and what you should be tracking across 3 different phases of your campaigns. The goal in all of this, of course, is to give you something that's a really replicable routine that you can keep going back to again and again. So it's not all new every time you launch a new campaign. So here we want to use data thoughtfully in focused ways and with great impact to support your decision making as you move forward. We also think about data as a way of ensuring that your campaigns stay agile and nimble through all of the changes. And now we've certainly experienced many more that can be thrown at you during the course of a sales cycle. So data is really here to be able to help steer your investments, to manage expectations internally, sometimes externally, and to support internal conversations with full alignment so that everyone, not just your marketing team, not just your executive, has a full broad picture about what success will look like in your campaign and how it's going along the way. So we're going to dig in here, but as we often do, before we zoom into the details, we're going to zoom way out because I want to remind you to ground yourself in just a couple of things that will make all of the rest of these data points more meaningful. So I want to start here, way out, with your organization's mission. Now, many of you may be able to recite this by heart. Maybe it is taped to the top of your computer screen right now. Some of you may be new to your organization, or maybe you just haven't looked at it in a while. This is, in theory, your organization's guiding light. It's your purpose. It's why you're there. It likely talks about who you're going to serve and what kind of relationships you want to create in your community. It's important to start all of our campaigns here, and in fact, all of our analysis here, even though it's really broad, because it reminds us of that horizon point that we have our eyes set on. So open up your another screen on your browser if you want to take a look at what your own mission is, but always start here and do this with your team as well. And then the next place that we always want to go are to campaign goals. So we're zooming in a little bit here. This isn't your organization's mission, but every campaign that you launch should have a series of goals that exist beyond just units and revenue. We always know that a ticket sales campaign has revenue goals attached to it and likely unit goals attached to it. That's your budget. That's different sometimes than how we might define a successful campaign. So what we want to be able to see in these additional goals is not specific. In fact, it's totally about you and what's right for your organization and your audience at this moment. But you might have goals about re-engaging lapsed bookers or getting some of that on-account money into an assets column and off your liabilities sheet from people who have had money on account for now potentially 2 years. Maybe you want to bring in new audiences. Maybe you want to bring in new audiences that look very different from your existing audiences. Maybe you have all these things and more. But make sure that you and your team are aligned about what the goal of every single ticket sales campaign is and what those additional success metrics are beyond units and revenue. Units and revenue, totally critical, but they're not the only way we can and should be measuring success for your organization or for your campaign. So once you've got these two things in place and you're really firmly grounded in why you're doing this campaign, how you're going to build relationships through this campaign to support your organization and to connect people off stage and on stage, off stage with each other, audience member to audience member in your communities, then we can start the real metrics work that you're probably here today to find. So as I mentioned, we've got metrics in 3 phases of your campaign: things that you need to do before you start, things that you need to do while your campaign is active, and then something you've got to do at the end of every single campaign that you run. Katie, you're going to take us through the first 3 here. I happily turn the baton over to you.
Awesome. Thank you, Caitlin. So, okay, we've got our revenue goals, and we've got our expense budgets, but are we looking at them together? And if you're not, you should be. So we want to maximize your resources and make smart, data-led decisions. Otherwise, we're going to end up overinvesting where we have smaller revenue goals and it's less impactful, and leaving money on the table by underinvesting where it does matter. So key metric number 1 is our cost of sale. Now, what is cost of sale? Strange kind of name. What we're going to be looking at is we're dividing our expense line by our revenue line, and that gives us a percentage. This percentage is only helpful if you bring some nuance into it. So in this case, we're recommending calculating on an event-by-event basis rather than looking at the total revenue and expense lines. In our expenses, we'll want to include ad buys across all channels, so our TV, radio, outdoor, digital, social, print, and also direct mail. We're not going to include staff salaries, photography, or outside design firms. So now that we have our cost of sale number calculated, what are we targeting? We have best practice numbers for North America and the UK, and this is based on research in each market. So as you can see, we're targeting 20 to 35% range for North America and 10 to 15 for the UK. And it's going to be really possible that when you do your own calculations that your cost and sale is below these ranges. And that might be okay. Again, this is situational and it relates to the overarching goals of each event. But it also might mean you need to advocate for additional investment or reallocate some of the expense budgets to set your campaign up for success. So by looking at cost of sale for each event separately, you're ensuring that your investment is in a healthy proportion to likely revenue, and it can keep you from overspending in low demand shows and underspending in those with huge revenue expectations.
Katie, I'm sure you've seen this with some of your clients. I'm just jumping in here because I see it with my clients all the time. I did this when I was a marketing director. When I had a show that was not selling and it was really low demand, there was this strong impulse to keep spending, throw money at it. That's what's going to save it. It's marketing. Marketing can save this show. It can get us where we need it to go. And then what we end up seeing happen is that you spend more and more and more, but that cost of sale can very quickly go on the other side of a best practice range in low demand shows. But now we've borrowed resources from other events that are more likely to meet those revenue goals. It's also why budgeting is really important. We're not talking about that here today, but when you have that cost of sale range set for each show, it'll keep you from overspending, which is what we see more often than not on shows that an extra ad isn't going to give you the volume of sales that you need to make up for those goals. So I don't know, you've probably seen it. Maybe you've done it too. I did that.
Thank you, Caitlin. That's super helpful. And just a helpful reminder of how to keep focused on the overarching goals.
Yeah, so, and Holly just asked a question wanting us to confirm 10 to 15% cost of sale average in the UK. Holly, honestly, it's higher than what a lot of our UK clients are spending. So this is pushing you. Both of these ranges are a little higher than what a lot of organizations are spending. So we're trying to push you a little bit to spend more maybe than you have been, but overall it's lower just based on how we've historically marketed in these very different markets. So that's why it's so different. But if yours is single digit numbers, we wouldn't be surprised. And if you can start to bump it up, at least in key events, I think you will see a really strong return on that investment. Sorry, Katie, go ahead.
No, so thank you for that. And thank you, Holly, for the question. So, okay, we've determined our cost of sale. Hooray, this is great. And we're really comfortable with what the expense budget looks like. But now, how do you allocate those budget expenses across all channels? We're not going to get into the details of campaign spends today, but we are going to stress that TRD recommends that direct channels should be prioritized. Those are the kinds that we can measure, and those are the ones that speak directly to audience members. So we're talking direct mail, which still has high open rates in digital. We're talking about email, digital, social. We need to keep it measurable, otherwise we just don't know what's working and what isn't. So if you're partnering with producers and agents, it's time to have the conversation as early as possible in those contract negotiations to make sure that you are really aligned on the goals for the campaign.
Ryan, you asked a great question. He's put in chat here, how do you segregate marketing costs targeted to a specific event versus ones that are supporting events throughout a season? Now, our counsel here is that this is nuanced. I don't know a lot about your organization, so I'm going to make some assumptions here. If you are a presenting organization or an orchestra that has tons and tons and tons of unique events, it can be really difficult to do a cost of sale for every single event that you have. So then we would want to talk about how you lump a few of those together. Maybe you're looking at October performances and you know what your tentpole production or performance is there, and you have some supplementary, not because they're related, just because they're smaller events around it. You could budget that way. So budget by October or by a 6-week period in the fall where there's a thematic connection. What's most important is that you're just not looking at the whole season. It can be really, really challenging. We also sometimes find that it's difficult to measure the effectiveness of a sale that's season long because we don't know if that's what got someone to say yes or if it's these campaigns that are really specific to the next event coming up that are having them say yes. So make sure you just know what you want each of those campaigns to do, but looking at the whole season just doesn't give you the nuance. So find some way to break it apart. I hope that's helpful. If not, write in chat and we can keep the conversation going there.
And also just add to that, it gives you nimbleness. If you know that a show is performing really well, or if it isn't, you can pull funds from individual budgets rather than, again, looking at one and then just really being stuck in that one number. Okay, so the next step in our journey is to think about active households. Now, it's a very simple metric, and it just to assess your quality of relationships that this data represents. So we're looking at percentage of active households in the database. And if you're not tracking this, you won't really have a high-level picture of how to build your campaign and then tactically how to focus into the greatest areas of opportunity. So if right now you have 2 years of data in your database, it's time to start tracking what percentage of those households are active. And so active households, as we define it, are those that had some kind of activity in the last 2 years or seasons. So again, time for some math here. Calculating our percentages for this, we're going to divide the households that you have actively in the time frame by the number of households in your database. Now, some of you are going to have super large databases or aging, so you might want to pick a snapshot. Here we've depicted that in a 5-year time period. So 2 years divided by 5 years in this example. And you're not going to need to run this all the time. If you just run this once or twice a year, it'll give you a really quick and clear picture about how your database is or isn't engaging. Knowing this is going to allow for strong goal setting. It'll allow you to broadly steer your campaign and invest appropriately. And most importantly, it'll allow you to focus on the areas of greatest opportunity. So, for example, if your goal is to increase your audience size this year, this metric will tell you where to look. If your percentage is low, it means you have extraordinary opportunity to re-engage with folks. If it's really high, you'll need to build laser-focused campaigns to attract new audiences. Now, I know COVID displaced all of our traditional audience habits, and you know who's engaged in the last 18 months. And so this is the time to really sort of dial in on who is active and how we can continue those relationships.
Holly, thanks for that question. You just asked, are we still recommending looking at this for 2 years based on how bizarre our world has been? Yes. The answer is yes, because this is really about recency. How recently has your database been engaging? Now, this number right now is going to look different, and it's okay that it looks really different from what it would have been before the pandemic and hopefully from what it looks like after the pandemic. But this is a metric to say, where are you right now with your relationships with your audiences? And then you can start to build goals from that. Right now, you might discover that you're at the low end of this chart where just 18, 20% of your audience has been engaged in some way over the last 2 years. Maybe it's even lower, depending on your business model and what kinds of programs you offered in the last 2 years. Totally okay. But now you know this is where we need to see growth. We want to get this number back to 40%, 50%, so that we're not starting entirely from scratch in our database. Now, if you're a new organization and everyone has engaged with you in the last 2 years, and just as Katie said, that's when you really have to focus on prospecting and acquisition campaigns. We have a couple questions that I just want to go back to here. Marilyn asked a question about cost of sales. She said, you mentioned not including staff costs. Does any of the overhead costs go into this percentage? No, we don't put any of it in our calculations. If you want to in your organization, sure, you can, but do it consistently, and then you would likely need to expand that range. Because if you start including a lot of overhead costs and you're in North America and that's what gets you over 20%, it doesn't mean you're sitting pretty, because we're still missing enough resources to be able to directly communicate with our patrons through ad channels, social channels, and other ways. We have one. Yes, okay, and I think I've answered that other question here about the 2-year period. Yes, 2-year period for now. It can and will change. It should change. So measuring it right now is really, really helpful to guide where you go from here. All right, thanks for all your questions, everybody. This is great. Katie, keep going.
Yeah, so now we're talking about per capita, which in other words, or a word that you may be more comfortable with, is average ticket price. So even on its own, it's a very useful data point, and this is probably something you're already tracking. But there is a key way to apply average ticket price calculations to your campaign that will act like a litmus test. So you'll know if the structure of your campaign and the scale of your haul is working in favor or against it. Now, for per capita, we're going to want to calculate our total ticket revenue, and that is not including comps, by the total revenue they've generated. Now, here's where the magic comes in. When you're able to calculate this week on week, you're able to see if the ticket price, how that's performing. And the goal is that this ticket price should increase. Now, why, please feel free to drop this in the chat. Why do you feel like that might be? Why would we want to see our ticket price increase?
Let's answer Darcy's
question. Yeah, I know. I'm like...
Demand. Yes, Brandon. Totally demand.
Yes, Brandon. Thank you. Other thoughts? Caitlin, do you want to jump in and answer that question while we're waiting?
So, okay, we've got a question in here from Darcy. Our organization is split into 3 different programs for that active patrons calculation. Should we do it by each program area or overall? Well, I mean, you're not going to like the answer, but I think the answer might be both. It might give you a much clearer, nuance is always helpful. We're never going to say that nuance isn't helpful. At the very least, do all of it. If you are the umbrella organization for all of these different genres and programs, absolutely looking at it overall is great. But if you have 3 distinct program areas, that will help better inform the focus of each of those campaigns. So yes, both. Yes, both is my quick answer.
Caitlin, can you just back up to that equation for per cap? Thank you. So yeah, we've got some great answers in the chat. So cheapest sold early. Yes, Holly, absolutely. Demand, yes. Never a cheaper price than today. Absolutely. All these things are right. And so the thing that we're really looking here is that we're not decreasing our price because of those fire sales. So yeah, fire sale, blowout, all seats must go, that drive people to wait to buy tickets later on. We also want to make sure that our haul is scaled correctly so that we're not left with the cheapest seats. We've sold all our expensive seats. All we have left are cheap seats. And yes, comps. How many comps are we using? Are they early on the run? Are they later? All of these things are super important to think of when we're thinking about our per capita.
Oh, Brian, great question. Okay, so we don't necessarily want it to increase through the year. Thank you for the clarification. This is the sales cycle for one campaign. So final is that final curtain or the night of the performance if it was a one-night performance. And this was a 15-week sales campaign leading up to it. So really what we want to see is week over week sales for an individual event is increasing every single week because that's what's showing us that discounts are falling off, that our scale of house is really built to leverage the demand that we see later in the sales cycle. Doesn't mean you can't discount later in the sales cycle, and you may have very good reasons for it not to do this, but it should be a very intentional reason. So this is why the gut check is there. Are we okay with changing what we see here? This is the impact it will have. Okay, great. All right, let's move on to things that, so this number 3, looking at our average ticket price, our per capita revenue, is something we want to do during the sales cycle. The other thing, of course, that we want to do during the sales cycle is to really look at sales pacing. So you're mid-campaign, you're checking your daily sales. I have clients that do this all the time. They know exactly how many dollars are coming in on any given day. You've got ads, emails flying out the door. You have all kinds of things coming back in. But we don't always really know how well or not the campaign is performing. I mean, unless you're virtually sold out months ahead of time, it can be hard to know, is this really where we should be? And in this particular climate, it's a real question. Where should we be? What does this mean for our sales pacing now? So you're likely already tracking progress to goal. We have a goal of making 120,000 pounds and we're at 50,000 pounds now. So you know these numbers. But what we want to be able to see is how is the trajectory that your sales line should take. So looking at sales versus pace will give you a really clear understanding of how your campaign's Here's what it looks like. It's a chart. Again, this is for one event. Let's say this is for the Nutcracker. So we've started that 5 months out because subscribers could add on the Nutcracker when they were subscribing in the summer or even before. And then we've got a goal line. That pace line is based on historic data. So this historic data is coming from your actual database and how actual sales for past events have progressed. What we're looking for here are mile markers that says, when do we need to be at 50% of sales? Or historically, when have we been at 50% of sales? When have we been at 80% of sales? So this line is based on the goal for this organization's show this year. Their goal is about $200,000. So that pace line ends up at $200,000. And then you've got your weekly cumulative actuals. And you can see here with this organization, they started behind. They had a really great response to their first appeal that went out about 10 weeks before the show opened. They were pacing ahead. Then things started to plateau. And where they are right now is about 3 weeks behind, 2 weeks behind where they should be to meet goal. So the conversations that this lets the team have is about how they're going to invest, where they need to change things in their campaign, or if they need to change expectations for what this show is capable of. This is one of the single best alignment tools for your entire organization to see on a regular basis for your organization. Artistic should absolutely see how this is coming in. Your box office, everyone in the box office should know how sales are coming in. Your marketing team, your executive, everyone should have a really clear sense of where you are in sales. And pace is one of the best ways to give them the most information. Okay, last. This is something that we would want to do after, during, either or both during our campaigns, are tracking response rates. Now, looking at response rates at the segment level, and if you've tuned into anything TRG's ever said, you know we talk a lot about the importance of segmentation. If you look at response rate at the segment level, then you know that you're not leaving money on the table. And like some of these other metrics that we've talked about, that you're not over investing in segments that aren't performing well in your campaign. So the response rate is calculated like this. You take the number of households that responded. So they said yes, they purchased, they came to your event, however you're calculating that. People who said yes, divided by everyone you directly invited. Now you're inviting a lot of people that you don't know in prospecting campaigns. It's fine, push that to the side. What we want to know here is who from our own database is saying yes. And then you'll know how many people are also new to file who weren't in your database that have said yes, if you're doing regular response reports. So I'm going to show you an example. It's an intense example. Yours doesn't have to be, but it can be. So you can decide just how complex it needs to be. This is a response rate for an organization, and you can see their segmentation is down the left-hand side of your screen. Yours can be more compressed or more nuanced, whatever is right for your organization, but it should be something that you can fairly easily pull from your database. So that I would say is the most critical bit. If this is unbelievably manual to pull every time, then you won't do it and it's not helpful and you'll waste time there. So pull things that you can actually easily do from your database. Then you can see the number of households in each one of those segments and then how many responded. That lets us calculate the response rate. So you can see for this organization, it's their most recent buyers and most recent buyers of biggest products or most events that said yes in this campaign. And as you go down that list, we have larger lists of longer lapsed people and the response rates start to dwindle. You could stop there. There's a lot that you can know just from this. We know from this that these top 3 segments are people that we're going to continue to reach out to because there is so much heat in that particular pipeline. I think I'm mixing metaphors. I feel okay about it. But there's so much activity right there that we can't let it go. But then you start getting down to the bottom and you have to wonder, how much more time do we spend on segments where we're seeing single-digit returns in our households? So you can start to cull your lists from there to really be able to capitalize on what's working now? Great question. The question is, what is MSTB? This organization uses that to say multi-single ticket buyer. Thank you, Katie. You beat me to it. Okay, so you can stop there with response rate, or you can go a little bit further. And the little bit further is to tack on this cost of sale metric by the segment level. Now, this is in your campaign. This could be for a Christmas carol. This could be for fall programming, depending on how you're able to allocate expenses and your resources, whatever makes the most sense for your organization. But now what we start to see is, are we wildly overspending on some of these key segments? Now, it's the exact opposite that we saw in response rates. We have the lowest cost of sale where we have the most responders, and the highest cost of sale where we have the fewest. But when you pair these things up, it becomes absolutely crystal clear who we don't need to spend money on. Doesn't mean we stop emailing them, but it means we're not going to continue to target them on social and Facebook, that we're not going to send them postcards and letters at this time. So for this organization, we looked at these last three, and there's a lot of households there that we cut, but we cut over 15,000 households for the next phase of the campaign. And all we saw is that response rates overall increased and our cost of sale decreased. So looking at these two in partnership with each other gives you a lot of really powerful decision-making data in front of you. All right, folks, that was 5 metrics that you can and should be considering for every single ticket sales, ticket booking campaign that you are running in this year. We've got more metrics coming in other ways in formats like this, where we'll talk about metrics for other kinds of campaigns, but we also regularly talk about this in TRG 30. So if you are not a registrant there, we'll send you something after your session today, so you can sign up, and we would love to see you in TRG 30s as well. Those are also free, and the conversation as well. Okay, Katie, we've got 10 minutes left, so I'm hoping maybe we have some more questions. Send them our way, and Katie and I will answer everything you've got.
Yeah, I guess I just want to go back and make sure everyone's feeling good about the per caps, and that's clear for everyone. So feel drop in the chat if there's things that you still need clarifying.
I'm also curious what metrics you all regularly depend on for your campaigns. What metrics do you use to make decisions? Drop those in chat. We'd love to see them. We can reflect on those, and your colleagues, I'm sure, will be grateful to know what you're seeing. I think you have to, if you're chatting and you want your peers to see, you've got to change that drop-down menu for everyone so that everyone can see what you're looking at. In that last chart, Matt, you had a couple questions here. In the last chart, what year is it? Fiscal year 19 subs current? Great question. No, that was the campaign that we were running in fiscal year 20, but we didn't have subscribers for whatever part of that season it was. They're a little bit funky, but no, we were targeting subscribers for add-on tickets in that. So no, this was not a specific campaign to get them to say yes to something they already have. And absolutely, this deck will be available. We will send that out to you as well after this today.
I see a question from Ilana with arrows to the multi-single ticket buyer. I'm assuming that's just a question about why that would be included or what that tells us. Caitlin, feel free to throw in some extra 2 cents here, but this segment is super helpful when thinking about acquisition of subscribers. You know your audience are already coming multiple times in a year, so why not try and get them to upsell to a subscription package? So that's a really key segment that you want to think about.
Yeah, multi-single ticket buyers behave differently. They're much more likely to say yes to a campaign than a single ticket buyer. So multi-single ticket buyer, I've been at least twice in the same season. If I've been twice in the same season, the chances that I'll say yes again and again are almost twice as high as somebody who's only been once in the season. Matthew, all right, you have a question here. You said, we have consistent or increasing per cap prices over a campaign, but struggle with volume even when per cap is increasing. Any recommendations? Oh man, that's a thing, isn't it? Well, if volume is Volume's always a thing. Volume's going to be a thing for everyone in this year, I suspect. So you have a lot of friends on this call. If volume is the issue, then there are times where I would forego the need to see an increase in per caps if strategic discounting to very specific groups might help you move some volume. So of course, that doesn't mean fire sale on your website, save 50%, broadcasting on the radio. But if volume is really an issue as you progress in that sales cycle, you can do strategic discounting, even though it'll take that per cap down, if that's what's most important. This also goes back to those campaign goals. What's the most important thing in your campaign? Is it volume? Is it revenue? Is it average ticket price? Are you concerned about what happens if people get used to paying too little? Knowing what those goals are will also help you go back in and make that decision. But Matthew, reach out after if you want to talk specifically. I'm happy to dig into it. Right. Folks, are there any other questions that you have? My gosh, Brian, what a great point. We really have to look at comps. How are we allocating comps? Where are we seeding them? Is that messing up our per cap? Is that actually doing what we need it to do for the fill in our house? We're going so far outside of the metrics today, but absolutely really tightening your processes or decision making around comps doesn't mean you can't give them. Comps are great and strategic and critical and necessary and all of those things. But knowing exactly when and why you do it makes really good sense. So thanks for doing that. Erin, how should you adjust those pacing expectations? Well, this is a year of real experimentation. So what I'm doing with my clients now is that we're starting with those historic pacing models. So we're still saying that at 6 weeks out, we should be at 50%. If historically they've been at 50%, it's where we're starting. But then this is all data that you get to manipulate so we can change it. And in fact, I have several clients, some of them are on the call now, so you all know exactly who I'm talking about, who are modeling multiple lines that point to different goal points. So in fact, it's the same shape of the sales, but they'll build one that says we want to get to $200,000, one that says our goal is 150, so that you can start to see what trajectory you're on. But then you're going to have to see what happens this year and change it. The historical data also doesn't have to come from a long time ago. So you can use the real data from your first show to perhaps inform what that sales trajectory will be for your second show.
Holly asked a great question. Is households invited based on mailing lists or wider numbers? Example, digitally targeted ads.
Yeah, Holly, great question. I think the way that I would, yes, to some digitally targeted ads, but only if you can get back to a household number. This is measuring how effective you were at talking to your own database about coming back or staying engaged. And not looking for as much nuance in prospecting. That becomes another bucket entirely. Who wasn't in our database? Who doesn't match any of these segments that said yes? So ultimately, you'll still capture them. But when you're thinking about households, think about people that you have names and addresses for. Who did we absolutely know we could talk to? So in Facebook, if you're uploading lists of your lapsed single ticket buyers and you have a campaign directly targeting them, yes, include that in your count. But if you're doing a prospecting Facebook campaign that's built on lookalikes, don't include those. All right, folks, thank you so much for joining us today. I think there may still be a couple of outstanding questions. We're going to give you 5 minutes of transition time because who in this Zoom world doesn't want 5 minutes of transition time? So please take it. You'll have our emails as follow-up. We welcome any additional questions. And if we didn't get to yours today, we will get right back to you on that. Thanks for joining us, Katie. Thank you so much for being here. A pleasure as always.
Thank you, Kaylin.
All right. Have
Thanks,
a great
everyone.
evening. Bye.
Bye.